Welcome to this little discussion. I was asked a couple of weeks ago to come and have a talk to the students, talk to yourselves about being chefs. And I just want to discuss quickly about how my career path started. Many people come to me and say, what got you started in the food industry? Back in 1973, 40 odd years ago, I was actually like you guys, I was in school, but I didn't know what to do with my career and what to do. And I ended up in a cooking class because the cooking class had all the girls in it. And it seemed like a very good at the idea at the time that me and a friend of mine would go into that class and sit in the class and have lunch every day and have the girls cook us lunch. And my career path started at that point because I found that I had an application for it and I really enjoyed it. And it was giving me an artistic value that I could put out on a plate. They call our profession today culinary art. So if we're culinary artists, we're trying to put a picture on a plate and not on a canvas. But I think the most important thing that you have to remember is that when you put that picture on a plate, you have to remember what the picture is and don't have it overpowered by the framework. So when I started out in my career in 1974, I actually started washing dishes in a small restaurant in Newcastle, Australia, which was just 2 hours north of Sydney. And I spent the weekends, every weekend. I'd go to school Monday to Friday. I'd finish school on Friday afternoon and I would take the bus half an hour to 45 minutes to the restaurant, and I would stay there all weekend. And I'd wash dishes from when I arrived around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening, through till midnight, 1 o'clock, and I'd be back up at 7:30 working with the boys in the kitchen making mise en place, and work the whole day through till midnight on a Saturday night, back up Sunday morning and do lunch, and then I'd get back on the bus after the lunch service on Sunday and go home. Monday morning, quite tired, I'd go back to school again for the rest of the week. But I loved the job, and I really, really enjoyed what I was doing. But actually the kitchen that I was working in wasn't something that I fancied. So I thought to myself, what am I going to do? And I had the opportunity then to work in another kitchen, and then another kitchen. What I realized was that every kitchen is different. Not every kitchen is the same. So I got offered an apprenticeship as a young chef down at Royal Sydney Golf Club in Sydney. And Royal Sydney Golf Club is one of the most prestigious golf clubs in Australia. It has the Royal insignia. There's only 3 or 4 of them. There's Royal Adelaide, Royal Melbourne and Royal Sydney that have the Royal insignia from England. And it was a very, very good club as an apprentice to learn. And I think that the most important thing that you guys have to understand as you begin a career in the hospitality industry, that learning is the most important thing. You need to learn as much as you can and continue to learn. So after I started my apprenticeship, I had a 4-year apprenticeship in Australia. We did 3 years of technical education, 1 day a week. So my employer employed me for 5 days a week, but 1 day a week I went to a school much like Shartec for 3 years. And then the 4th year, I spent the 4th year just working in the business as a chef for my customer, my patron who employed me. But the thing was that in that particular kitchen, I was fortunate enough to work in a kitchen that was structured. So we had an a la carte dining room service, we had a saucier, we had an entremetier section, we had the garde-manger section, we had the pâtissier as well, we had cafes and banqueting. So I was able as an apprentice to move around in the different sections, and again, 40 years ago, 35 years ago, that's what we were there to do, was to learn. Employment crush the way it is at the moment, it's much harder in Australia, and I presume it's much harder here in Singapore, because when you work for an employer, you're expected to fill in also as another cook. So it's hard to get that learning curve during your training period. So therefore, what you've got to understand is that if you go into a business like this, and you need to learn, you've got to spend as much time as you can at the business. You know? So during my apprenticeship, then I also took up another job, and I worked in a pastry kitchen. So I'd then finish work at 11 o'clock on the banquets, 11:30, and I'd get up at 4 in the morning, and I'd go and spend 3 hours at the pastry kitchen, learning how to bake and how to make pastries. Free of charge, free of charge. And I go to my own job then at 7:30 in the morning. So you can see a pattern starting to develop here that if you want to work in hospitality, it's long, hard hours. But I do it from here because I love the job and I love what I do. And I still love what I do. I'm getting a bit older now and it's a bit harder to do it. but I love that particular element of the job, and I live for my work. So when I finished my apprenticeship, then I obviously wanted to go abroad. So in 1979, 77, 78, I took off and went abroad, and I ended up staying overseas for nearly 26 years. And I went back in 2006, or 77, 78, it's about 27, 28 years. I lived abroad and I worked abroad. I went home on a couple of occasions to do some jobs back there, but I worked all around the world, and I actually went and worked for some good properties, but I looked for the best chefs to work for, because the best chefs were not necessarily working in the best establishments, but I wanted to go and work with good chefs that knew how to cook. So I ended up going to Europe, and I spent some time, I spent a whole year in Switzerland, in a small village called Lausanne, which is just outside Geneva. And it's up in the mountains. So I spent a winter season and a summer season working there. And at 23 years of age, I ended up as the executive chef of the Grand Hotel in Lausanne. And it was just a great opportunity for me to be able to learn how to run a kitchen at that early age. And I was one of the youngest guys in the area running a Swiss ski resort hotel. And I always have a small joke with some of my Swiss friends that I actually went to Switzerland to teach them how to cook. So it was actually quite funny with those guys. But then I took off and went to London. And London, I had the opportunity to, everybody I hope would know Mr. Anton Mosiman, who was the executive chef back then of the Dorchester Hotel. He now has his own business in London. And Mr. Mosiman was one of the great chefs in England at the time, Swiss, but one of the great chefs in London. And he offered me a job, and I went for a job interview there. And my pastry chef and my chef Galmager during my training had done their apprenticeships at the Savoy Hotel. So for the 4 years of my apprenticeship, I'd heard so much about Mr. Trompetto, who was the executive chef of the Savoy Hotel then. I'd heard a lot about him, and I obviously knew who Mr. Mosiman was. But when I went to talk to Mr. Mosiman, he asked me to stay for 2.5 years and spend 6 months in every section working there. And I don't know why, but I decided no, I didn't want to do that. I got offered the job at the Savoy Hotel as well, and Mr. Trompetto and Mr. Azar didn't actually put that stipulation on me. So I went to the Savoy, and I spent a year at the Savoy Hotel in London. Prior to it, joining 40 hotels, and it was very much a classical kitchen. Mr. Escoffier was the chef of the Savoy Hotel back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and some of his stuff was still in the office. So for me as a young cook growing up, that was a fantastic place to work. And it was very structured, and it was very much a learning curve that I really think gave me a foundation to be a better cook and a better chef. And I think you've got to differentiate. You guys are learning how to be cooks. Once you become cooks and you become great cooks, then you have to learn how to become chefs and great chefs. The best chefs don't necessarily make the best cooks. And the best cooks don't necessarily make the best chefs. So when you start on your career path, you've got to learn which direction you want to go. Do you want to be a chef? And the word chef obviously comes from France, being chief. So chef de cuisine, do you want to run a large kitchen and be a manager? Or do you want to be a cook and still on the stoves? And I have many of my friends who I've grown up with and cooked with over the years who have gone off in that path to become chef de cuisines. I still love to cook. And I still love to be on the stove. So my restaurant back in Australia, I'm on the stove with the boys every day. Maybe not for the 12 or 16 hour days that I used to be, due to my old age, but I am on the stove during the service hours with the boys. And it was the same thing back at the Savoy Hotel. As a young chef growing up, Mr. Trompetto would sit in his office, and another thing that he taught me very much that sticks with me today, and I still incorporate it into the way I run a kitchen, is that the first thing you do when you arrive in a kitchen is you say good morning to your other colleagues that are actually there. And you say good afternoon to them when you're there. And Mr. Trompetto had a kitchen brigade of around 168 cooks in the kitchen. And he would come to work at 7:30 in the morning, and he would walk around every section and call every cook by their first name. And for me that was pretty impressive, because I never had a contact with my chef, Mr. Trompetto. My contact was with my sous chef, and my executive premier sous chef back then running the kitchens. If you ever went to Mr. Trompetto's office, it was for one reason and one reason only. You're either getting fired or you're going to cop a whole lot of shit because you've done something wrong. And so Mr. Trompetto was running that kitchen like a general. And it was the opportunity to learn from that in what I call a traditional or a classic style kitchen. And they had all the sections. And on the service at lunch and on the service at dinner, we had up to 12 sous chefs working on the stove. And at the restaurant I have now in Singapore, I teach the young guys to first, when you cook on the stove, is to taste the food. People eat with their eyes, their nose, and their mouth. But you have to taste the food. And when I cooked on the stove at the Savoy Hotel, I would cook something up, and if I hadn't tasted it and the seasoning wasn't correct, and I put it on the pass for my sous chef to do the plate up, next thing I know, I'd get hit in the shoulder, or it'd whiz past my ear going, that's not right, make it again. So that doesn't happen today. People still get quite upset in the kitchen, but it doesn't happen today. But it did back then, and it built my character in the kitchen. Because the things that you taste there, the sous chef should get it. He's the last man on the pass where the guest is getting that food. He has to actually determine whether that dish is going to the guest or not. So it's really, really important that when you're cooking on the stove, whether you're doing the plate up and the dish up, and you're the actual sous chef and you're actually the chef for the party doing the actual cooking, that you taste your food and make sure the seasoning is right. Because for me, a lot of people get it wrong. They think that cooking with the eyes is the most important. How good does it look on the plate? But I disagree. First let it taste, then let it smell and the senses come out, and then work on the presentation. And I see a lot of young guys when I travel around Asia and around the world today, presentation's fantastic. But when you taste it, you don't have the taste, the texture, the smell, the aromas of the food. And go back to the great cuisines, like what the French do, like what the Italians do, and go back 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago and look at the style of food that they did. Presentation wasn't the major issue. It was the flavour and the senses and that. So it's really important. The Savoy Hotel gave me a great grounding to working in some of the great kitchens with some great chefs. And then I was fortunate enough to leave and went over to the United States. I spent about 8 weeks, 9 weeks travelling around the United States on vacation. And I ended up at the Bel Air Country Club in Hollywood. The chef there had been there for 47 years, Carl Hugel. And it was through my contacts of my college, when I said to you earlier that I go to a pastry kitchen, one of my teachers at the school that I worked at was very, very good in Galmogère, and he was Hungarian. And he was very, very good at Galmogère work, so cold buffet work, etc. So any spare time I have, I would go out to his house and go into his room, into his house, and he would teach me different things about Galmogère work, which helped me then for competitions and all that ongoing. He gave me a contact of his very good friend at the Bel Air Country Club in Hollywood. And I went and saw the chef, Carl Hugel, and Carl said, what do I want to do? I said, well, I'm traveling around with a couple of friends and I'm thinking about going back to Australia. I've been away for a couple of years. He said, would you like to work here at the Bel Air Country Club? I ended up staying there for nearly 3 years over the 1984 Summer Olympic Games in Los Angeles. And I made a lot of connections, but working in America is a different style of food again. And so you're learning all different styles. I've been in Switzerland, I've been at the Royal Sydney Golf Club, I'm in London learning more of a French traditional style of food. Now I'm in America learning about heavy catering because we had huge banquets. And I really, really enjoyed my time there. Over the 1984 Olympic Games, so Mr. Peter Ueberroth, who was the chairman of the Olympic Organising Committee, was a member of the club. So I was fortunate enough to be a part of the culinary team that prepared the dinner for the President of the United States after the opening ceremony of the 84 Olympic Games. And I stayed there for 3 or 4 years, and you can imagine the sort of people that I had the opportunity to meet back in those days as far as Hollywood was concerned, because the Bel Air Country Club is one of the most exclusive clubs in Hollywood. And I got the opportunity to meet those people, work in their homes and cook in their homes during that time there. And then I got the opportunity to branch out from there after 3 years and work for 2 private caterers in Los Angeles. Los Angeles has a very, very heavy community that does a lot of entertaining, a lot of banqueting, a lot of entertaining in their homes. They have some really big homes, so that the competition for in-house catering is very, very big in LA, or it was back then. And I worked for a company called LA Celebrations, and I worked for another company run by a lady called Gay Class. And we used to do private parties in people's homes, for up to 1,000 people in their gardens. And it was just a great opportunity that I could work my way up in that company. I ended up being one of the head party chefs. There was 2 of us, and we got, what the beauty of it was that they would come to us at the beginning of the month, and they would say, Scott, these are the parties you got. Now, if you were the #1 party chef, you got the offer of the best parties for the month. And it could be during the Academy Awards, but Scott, these are the parties we've got on, which ones do you want to do? So I could say, well, I want to work 30 days straight because next month I'm not going to do anything. I could work the month, get paid by the hour. These are the parties that I'll do. And then once I pick mine, she would then go to the second chef and she'd say, which ones do you want to do? Scott's taken those ones, you've got the next choice. So the opportunity to actually work and learn outside catering from those people was fantastic, because the second lady that I said I worked for, Gay Class, I actually ran her party kitchen. So I would go in the morning at 7 in the morning, prepare all the food for her parties, set everything up for the outside catering. The chefs would then arrive in the trucks and the cars. We'd pack everything up by 4 o'clock and then they would go off. I would then get in the car and I'd go to the next party chef and I would do exactly what those guys had done. I'd back up, get into the truck and take the things to the parties. So I spent 3 years in Los Angeles doing that. And then I had the opportunity in 1988 to go to Calgary. I actually was on the Australian culinary team inadvertently in between being in Los Angeles, and went to Vancouver in 1987 for the World Culinary Arts Festival. And I was on the Australian national team. And the team that we shared the kitchen with was Team Calgary. So it was a regional culinary team. We were the national team, and we're out at the Eagle Flight Kitchens in Vancouver. And the guys there in Calgary obviously started talking about the Winter Olympics coming up, and I said, you know, I'd love to come to Calgary for the Winter Olympics. I've done 84, it'd be great to do a second games to come and see the Winter Olympics. They gave me a contact of a gentleman who I contacted. Next thing you know, I get a letter from the organising committee offering the executive chef's job at the Athletes Village. And I went to the Canadian Embassy in Los Angeles and said, I have this letter of offer, I need a visa for Canada, bang, stamped it. Next thing I know, I was in Calgary. I went into Calgary in January, the Olympics started at the end of February, and I basically was a coordinating chef for the Athletes Village. We had banquets there in the Athletes Village and lunch and dinner for around 13 to 15,000 covers a day. So my experience at the Savoy Hotel and then at the Bel Air Country Club with large numbers in catering enabled me to be able to do that job. And it was more about organisation, because we had so many different things going on during the Olympics. The Olympics are controlled by one area of catering. Even the athletes and the people that go to events cannot take food from their different sites. They can't go to hawker stalls and buy food from there. They have to take the food from a central area so it's controlled. During each day we had up to 6 health inspectors working with us in the kitchen, who controlled everything and tested everything to make sure there was no bacteria, and I've never experienced that. And it was just long, long days for nearly 9 weeks, from 2 weeks before the game started through to a month after they'd finished. And then the 2 weeks off, so 7 or 8 weeks, it was just non-stop work. I actually slept on the floor in my office because I was committed to the job and I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it was just something that would be in my memory now as it is for a lifetime. And again, the people that you meet working at. But it's being a cook that to me has got me to that point and working in that position. So during those Winter Olympic Games, I then had the opportunity to go back down to Los Angeles and work down there again. I spent another 12 months in LA before I went home. And when I got home, I opened up the Western Hotel in Sydney, as you heard earlier. And then I started traveling the world promoting Australian food for export. So through my cuisine, so I was getting offers to go all around the world and cook on food promotions and food festivals. And from 1989-90 through to nearly 2000, 2004, 2005, I spent 15 years traveling around the world doing up to 23 to 24 events a year. So the career path that I had was really good, and then it led to what I'm doing today. I went home from London. I had a restaurant in London for a couple of years. I actually opened Osha up in the UK in 2003. In 2004 it was voted the best new restaurant in the UK in the ITV Carlton TV Awards, and we were runner-up for best service in the UK at the restaurant in London. And I'd actually had the opportunity to spend some time there, but then I got quite sick and my mother had cancer. So I went home to Australia. My wife and kids were living in Australia, and they went home, or I went home to them. And then I looked for my own business back in Australia, but I still had the Osha concept. I got contacted by Genting, and I actually worked on the bid proposal for the second casino bid out on Sentosa Island, which was then presented to the Singapore government, and Genting were fortunate enough to get the bid. And basically worked on all the food and beverage concepts and the ideas of what was going to happen. that was presented to the Singapore government, and they got the bid, and part of my deal was I'd like to have a restaurant out at Sentosa. So Osher now is reborn out in Sentosa and has been there for nearly 3.5 years since we opened. So the career path that I've had has been a journey that I've really, really enjoyed. But Osher itself now is a little bit about a reflection of my whole life, and my food is. I have a restaurant in Australia. Everybody's dream, and I can ask probably some of you, what is your dream? What do you want to do in the long term? Many young people say, oh, chef, we'd like to own our own restaurant. We'd like to own our own small hotel. Well, I tell you, it's great to be able to do that, but don't do it too early in your career. But on the other hand, don't do it too late either. I opened up my own business back in Australia in 2006, and now I have a small boutique hotel up in the Hunter Valley in the wineries. I have 13 bedrooms, I have a cafe, I have a tapas bar, I have 2 private dining rooms. One seats 25, the other one seats 14, and I have a gourmet restaurant that seats 85. The gourmet restaurant has 3 hats in the Sydney Morning Herald Good Food Guide, which is our Australian equivalent of Michelin stars, whatever you'd like to call it. So I have that, and then now I have this business here. I also have another business in Melbourne where I produce stocks and sauces. So I have 3 large vats that take around 1,500 litres of solid and 1,500 kilos of liquid. And we make stocks and sauces. So we make fond de veau, fond de brune for export. And we do about 700 metric tonne a year. So we have rotary ovens, rotating the bones, the vegetables, as you do in a smaller kitchen. But my pots are 3,000 litres. So as I said, 1,500 kilos of solid, 1,500 litres of liquid. And then we boil for 12 hours and we make all these different stocks and sauces. It's all come about from my experiences over the years. But now having my own restaurant and my cuisine here at Osher is really, really interesting for me because I love what I do, as I said in the beginning. But what I want to show you quickly is just some of the images from out at Osher. There. Has anybody been out to Resort World yet?
Yes.
Everybody been to Universal?
Yes.
Everybody been to the Marine Life Park?
No.
Anybody been to Joe Robichon's restaurant?
No.
Anybody been to Osher?
No.
There's your answer. You know, you have to be keen enough to go and look at these places, even if you can't afford to go and eat in them. Walk your way in like you own the place and just have a look. Anytime you want to walk into Osher and say that you're from Shartek, my guys will show you around and let you have a look at the restaurant. You have to want to learn. I always say that your mind is a filing cabinet. When you're young, the filing cabinet's empty. So start filling up the filing cabinet. Because when you get to my age, 45, 50 years of age, you need to start drawing on the information in the filing cabinet to continue to be great chefs. Because you're always looking for new ideas. And where do the new ideas come from? They come from going and visiting places and seeing new things. And if you can't afford to travel or go abroad, you need to rely on what you've got upstairs. If you own your own restaurant, I mean, in Singapore, how old do you have to be to retire? 60, 65? What's the retirement age for work in Singapore?
65.
Sorry?
65.
65. It's 65 in Australia as well. I'm now 54, so theoretically I've still got 11 years to go. Most of you guys, what's the age range, 20? 24?
18.
Sorry?
18 to 20.
18. So you still have nearly 50 years to go of a working life. When you look at it in that perspective, it's a long time. But life is not a dress rehearsal. You're here for a good time, not a long time. I had the opportunity to go to Egypt and go to the pyramids in Egypt, and in the evening time go back and see a laser light show around the pyramids. And I sat there at the end of the laser light show and they came on and said that they think the pyramids have been there for nearly 5,000 years. They don't know. But they're throwing 5,000 years out there. I'm sitting there going, well, my father and my father's father and uncles and everybody have never lived past 70 years of age. My father's the very first adult male on my father's side to get past 70. So I'm thinking to myself, that's been there 5,000 years. I'm here for but a sand grain in a desert. So you need to be able to do everything you can as soon as you can. But you need to structure it and you need to plan it out. So as young chefs, what do you want to do in the next 5 years? The next 5 years, you need to finish your college education here at Chartec, learn as much as you can, and then go out and work in the industry out there to learn as much as you can to get to the next 5 years, and then the 5 years after that. So plan it out and think about it. My plan one day was to own my own hotel and my own restaurant. And fortunately enough, I've got both. But the restaurant and the hotel is right, and this is it's supposed to work. Food reflects lifestyle. Yeah. Food reflects lifestyle. So the restaurant reflects me and my lifestyle and the lifestyle in Australia. So we have a lot of air, and we have a lot of open air space, an open kitchen plan. The whole thing is transparent. Nothing is cooked behind. Everything is open. The pastry is open. Obviously, everybody will know Chef Otto. Douglas is my chef de cuisine in the restaurant. We run a program twice a year out at OSHA. I call it Cooking with Friends. Last year I had Chef Chris Taylor from Perth come over and cook with my boys in the kitchen and Douglas and my service staff, and Chef Otto in November. This year now, I'm starting today, we have Chef Rodrigo de Carlo starting with the WGS. He has a Michelin star in Spain. And then I have another gentleman coming, another good friend of mine from a restaurant called Bacchus in Australia. He has one hat in the Good Food Guide. Tim Montgomery, he'll be there. And then Gaia Sky is coming out with me in October. He won the Bocuse d'Or a couple of years ago. So this Cooking with Friends program and having chefs coming in to actually expect, like we're doing today, talking and expanding knowledge. I want to bring those guys in to show my service staff and everything. So the restaurant itself, as you can see, is quite air and light, which is what Australia's about. Australia's a very healthy country. We do a lot of outside exercise, a lot of light, that sort of thing, and the food reflects that. Private dining rooms. I believe in private dining rooms. I have a private dining room in Australia. This one is my Penfolds Grange room. Penfolds Grange is the Chateau Margaux of Australia. It's the very high-end red wine. So this seats 14 people, and it's just a private room. My private dining room in Australia is called the Trevor Drayton Hunter Valley Wine Room. And again, it seats 14 people. Trevor Drayton was a very good friend of mine. He made the wines at Drayton's, which is one of the oldest wineries in the Hunter Valley. And unfortunately, he was killed in an accident at the winery 3 years ago when I opened the restaurant. So I have a room dedicated to him. People can come in, and there's obviously a presentation of wine and separate menus and that in that area, yeah? My food also, over the years, has incorporated a lot of indigenous flavours from Australia. Australia is one of the youngest countries in the world, and yet we have one of the oldest proven cultures. Aboriginal culture in Australia dates back 40,000 years, they say. So before the white man went down there and discovered Australia in 1770, our Aboriginal people lived off the land. So they fished, they hunted, and they used berries and nuts. I don't use a lot of the protein. I don't cook with a lot of kangaroo, emu, that type of thing, but I use a lot of the nuts and berries. I use about 24 or 26 different varieties, but the Aboriginal communities that I've spoken to tell me there's thousands of them. You've just got to go out and hunt for them. And many of them are foraged for. Many of them are foraged for. In the top right-hand corner, it's a quandong. Quandong is like an orange skin, but it's double the vitamin C of an orange, and it grows in very arid areas, so it works really well in Australia because we don't have a lot of rainfall. The Aboriginals say it's got double the vitamin C of an orange. So it's very, very healthy. On the right side here we have ground wattle seeds. Wattle is our national flower. It's from the acacia tree. We have 144 different types of acacia trees, but 4 that the Aboriginals can actually take the seeds from, roast them and grind them. And it has the flavour and texture of coffee and hazelnut. In the front, we have monthry berries, which are like an apple berry. Small fruit, which are really, really pungent and quite sour, so you counteract them with sugars and honeys. Up in the top left-hand corner, everybody in Singapore obviously knows lemongrass. Our equivalent of lemongrass is what we call lemon myrtle. So it's a very citrusy leaf from a myrtle tree. And over on the left-hand side are the lily-pilly berries, which are the texture of a watermelon, but the flavour of a clove. And then it's sitting on a piece of paper bark. This is paper bark here. And again, a lot of older cultures wrap their food and bury their food. An oven can be an oven no matter how you want to cook it. An oven is to have the heat all the way around it. Cooking on a stove means you have heat on top or you have heat underneath. So the people used to wrap in banana leaves and everything and bury them. The Hawaiians are known for the hangi. The Kiwis and the Maoris, the same thing, where they bury things and cook. Aboriginal people used to use paper bark from a paper bark tree, but they also used it as a form of writing. So I incorporate a lot of that into the cuisine that I do. Our flatbread signature, I cook everything in my restaurant in Australia in a stone hearth oven. Everything's done in a hearth. One of our signature dishes is all our different flatbreads with different toppings on them. But the hearth actually gives me the opportunity to do the pan work and everything on a heat that I can control from up on top and also underneath, because the hearth is actually the floor of the oven. And it gets quite hot, and so the pans sit on the hearth. I guess for most of you, to explain what a stone hearth oven is, it's basically a pizza oven. And it can be wood burning and gas fired. But I have a roll-in, roll-out boiler in one door, and then the other two doors, we just have the hearth. So we can do things like the flatbreads, we can also do the pan work, and I cook the pan work. In Australia, I don't have a stove, I do everything in the oven. Signature dishes, we try to develop signature dishes and something that give people the wow factor when they come to the restaurant. This is actually a ice experience. I really enjoyed as a kid growing up the Slurpees when we go to the fairgrounds and go to the shows where they used to kachang and make the ices. And then in my restaurant in London, Osha, and now in Singapore, I have a ceviche bar. People love to eat the very freshest raw fish and seafood, and I think it tastes fantastic when it's done that way. So the idea here was to combine kachang, a local frozen ice, flavor the ice with different things like calamansi, do martinis, pina colada, make the ices, and then combine them with the fresh seafoods on top. And the guest gets 5 or 6 different ices each time they come out to have the ice experience. In London, one of my signature dishes, because we sold a lot of foie gras, I cannot sell foie gras in Australia because it's not allowed to be imported unless it's pasteurised and tinned, and you can't get fresh foie gras. So here in London and here in Singapore, we developed a signature dish which we actually crumb with polenta. I don't know whether you've ever had the opportunity to pan fry fresh foie gras, but it has a lot of fat come out as it does. By lightly crumbing it in polenta, you don't get that buttery, oily dissipation out of the foie gras when you cook it. So I crumb it in polenta. This particular one has lily pillies and rhubarb underneath it. It's served on a butter poached piece of daikon radish and just some small leaves on top. This is one of the signature dishes that was in the restaurant in London and is still on the restaurant here in Singapore. But it's really important that when we change menus, we stick with signature dishes, because people come looking for signature items when they come to signature restaurants. But we change garnishes and sauces around quite a bit. So the actual protein and the picture on the plate, you remember I talked about the picture on the plate? Picture on the plate is actually the foie gras. You know, and it's complemented by the garnishing and the saucing and my ability to be able to cook. It's not overpowered. The tapas bar. I have a tapas bar in Australia, I have a tapas bar and a terrace bar here at Osha in Singapore. We do a wide range of different tapas. And it's really, really important that when people come and have a drink, that you can offer them something to eat and be only what I call pika food. So in my bar in Australia and the bar here, we offer different tapas style foods. We do flatbread toppers with the ocean trout and we've got mussels, there's wagyu beef, teriyaki skewers, some clams, and in the back we have chorizo with tomato and served with Turkish bread. Another signature from the restaurant in London that I developed back then was hot chocolate soup with black pepper ice cream. And it was a big seller back in London, and I've kept it on here and I have it on the restaurant menu in Australia as well. The idea came about because I was making a dish with pepper. I was marinating some fruit with a black pepper syrup, and I'd actually got too much pepper in it. I had the chocolate Valrhona chocolate pudding we were making as well. The mix was already done and I was macerating the fruit, I put too much in. I just got a piece of the chocolate and put the chocolate, have you ever seen I don't know what you call like a lava cake, where you cut the cake and the chocolate oozes out? Well, that's what I was doing because every other French chef was teaching me how to do it. And I had that on my menu. So I grabbed the chocolate, I thought, man, That's an interesting combination, the chocolate and the pepper. So rather than serving the lava cake like that, I put it in a dish and baked it. But I didn't bake it all the way. I left it quite warm and liquidy underneath, so you have that cakey texture on top and that warm liquid underneath, chocolate soup. So I served it in a soup bowl in London, and then I made black pepper ice cream because it's a combination of hot and cold. It's really about combinations. You need smooth, you need crunch. So here you have the smooth chocolate, the crunch of the biscuit. You have the spiciness of the pepper and the cold of the ice. So you have all those tastes and textures. So now you're starting to eat with your mouth and you're smelling with your nose, and all of a sudden you're starting to look at the presentation. But first and foremost is the taste of the dish and the combinations of your flavours. We've made Tattlers for the last couple of years now, a restaurant. The restaurant won the Best Dining Experience for the Singapore Experience Award, so it was great for us and the team, but OSHA is about people and about everybody that works in the unit. And I think it's really important to understand that you're a team. There's no I in team. When you work in the kitchen, you have to all work together as a team. So it's really important that when you work and you build a kitchen, be it your own as a chef de cuisine, be it your own as a chef de partie, building your team in your small section, you need people that you can work with and understand what you want to do. Because you're not successful if it doesn't work. Okay? Fortunately, the restaurant here has done really well. I'm looking at expanding the brand, doing a few more out. I've got the opportunity to do something in Sydney later this year, early part of next year. So my career, as I said, has moved on in different paths, but I've concentrated on learning. And that's what I can only say to you as young chefs. You must go out and learn as much as you can. And work not necessarily at great places, but work with great chefs. And always remember that when you walk across the bridge, never burn the bridge. Because one day you may need to turn around and walk back over it again. Do people understand what I'm saying there?
Yes.
You know, so as much as you may not like the job you're currently working in or the position you're in, look at what you're learning from that position.